Hello, this is Chiron's Cave. I'm Aaron. Today's episode, we have a special guest, Desere, here with us. Susan is not here with us. She unfortunately has laryngitis. In the interest of keeping the show going, Desere was gracious enough to agree to come on and help us get a show for this coming Sunday, since we're out of content currently. Which is the first time we've been sitting on like 4 episodes continuously. We were just killing it, like keeping like 4 episodes in the can, and then we both got busy and then sick, and then now we had the last one actually that we released was just me reading an essay from a book by James Hillman, edited by James Hillman, who's a archetypal psychologist. He was C.G. Jung's apprentice, sort of. So anyway, the last episode was on Hephaestus, the Greek god Hephaestus. It was an essay I read out of a book called Facing the Gods. And so that's the first time that's even happened, where it's just been a solo thing that we've put out, because that was the last thing we had prepared, and now we have nothing. So luckily we have you. So thank you for being willing to come on and share. So do you want to say anything just about yourself by way of introduction?
Okay. Well, my name's
What do
Desere.
you do?
I am a traveling science teacher. So basically, I have a bunch of experiments and specimens and biological hides, tans, skins, feathers, and all kinds of things to learn about science through experiential hands-on. I visit schools and homeschool groups and learning groups all over the country where people are wanting to learn with an experiential education opportunity in various subjects and give people hands-on connections with the natural world. And I've been doing that since 2022.
Yeah. So we met via Turtle Island.
Yes.
In like 2000.
So formerly.
Go ahead. Yep.
Yeah, for 16 years, I directed a summer camp and historic heritage farm in North Carolina, where we're always seeking new educators. And that's when we came across you, Aaron.
Yes.
I think specifically through bamboo was our first connection.
Yep. I went to a family's learning together in 2014 as a vendor.
Wow.
And that's
a long time ago already.
Yeah, that's right. Time flies when you're getting old. When you're getting older. Anyway.
That's part of the staying above ground package.
Yeah. So yeah, we met Turtle Island. I was there as a vendor, and then you commissioned me to build a bamboo like washing station.
Tippy-top. Yeah.
For hand washing?
Yeah, that's right. So back then we were to kind of stay on brand with using outhouses and addressing human waste in sort of an antiquated or nouveau kind of way, depending on your perspective. We wanted a hand washing station that was a little bit more on brand than like the 5-gallon bucket. And so we knew that Aaron had some bamboo experience, and I think that I reached out to you and said, would you be willing to kind of like make this bamboo wall? And then maybe some of the inspiration came from, I don't know if we can shout out like movies, modern movies, but there's that one scene in a Kill Bill movie where there's a bamboo water feature that fills up and pours water out.
Yeah.
That may have been the inspiration initially, but we wanted the container to be bamboo and the foot pedal apparatus to be bamboo so that it could just fit in with the natural surroundings, but also just be reclaimed by the mother when we didn't need it anymore. And that is exactly what happened.
Yeah.
I think we got two solid years out of that, what we call a tippy tap. And there's thousands of variations of, handless hand washing stations.
And Mother Nature reclaimed it via a storm, correct? It like blew the whole thing away pretty much. You guys had strong winds or something? Am I recalling that?
Yeah. Yeah, we had gale force winds that kind of just shredded it back and, returned to the soil.
Yeah, because it was just sort of I mean, it kinda protected a little bit by some woods, I guess, but it was kinda a little bit in the open, and it was just a split bamboo
Yeah.
thing. It wasn't like a structure that was meant to last forever, which what structure is,
No, and that was kind of the point, when it did get reclaimed, it wouldn't be offensive. It wouldn't be leaving plastic micro trash behind. I think we even use natural cords, so it's not like we left paracord there that's going to end up in some bird's intestines or throat or something.
Wow,
So
paracord, yeah, with
the
nylon.
yeah,
Yeah.
the whole planet is covered in that, because of like the fishing industry and what we do on boats at sea. But our tippy tap had two different species of bamboo, if I recall, at least, because the main vessel was the real big bamboo
Yeah,
that could
Moso.
hold maybe at least 2 quarts at a time.
Mhm.
So you could fill that giant piece of bamboo, which was then held on cord down to the thinner bamboo that we wove into sort of a protective barrier wall to prevent splashing and just create a little bit of a privacy break. And also an indication like, hey, this is what's happening here. But rather than like an ugly plastic cord and a 5 gallon bucket, this bamboo installation just fit. It fit into nature. It was unoffensive. It was on brand with the other hand hewn buildings. And so it was a second time that we interacted that I thought, oh, Aaron's really onto something because your splitting techniques and the tools that you had um, just seemed so relatable to so many of the people that came through. We hosted around 3,000 visitors a year there. And so everyone who came and washed their hands, which was mandatory, got to interact with that tippy tap
That's really cool,
that
yeah.
you helped us create.
Yeah.
And all the people that were there when we made it, we made an educational experience about making it. So there may even be on some ancient YouTube channel videos of us using your splitters and assembling it and then all the people then that got to use it too. So lots of people have walked away understanding that you don't need modern infrastructure to keep sanitary. Kind of the undercurrent message too.
Yeah, that's really cool, yeah. So y so pivot somewhat into more mythical, astrological, topics, since this is Chiron's cave and one of the, our main focus is archetypal psych it's archetypal psychology slash astrology. So, it's both astrology and psychology. It's also just psychological astrology. So basically, my engagement at least with astrology, and so obviously I can't really speak for Susan, is and her engagement with it, but I'm not so much about predicting things using astrology. Um, I'm more about looking at the archetypes, so the planets as archetypes. So you can kind of understand this as the human mind is constructed, using archetypes, which are like, for instance, the cynics is an archetype. So, like, think of old man time, think of Saturn, Kronos. Um, that's an archetype. So it's something that exists in the human psyche for all of us, or like the lover, the mother, the father, um, the the poor is another one as an archetype. So what we can do with archetypal astrology is look at the planets and look at them as archetypes. And so it's almost a way, it's like and we're all in relation to that, right? So that's a human, it's a human construction that we're all in a relationship to, and the nativity shows your particular individual relationship to those archetypes. So we can read that to sort of get information about your psyche and your experience on Earth. And so it's not so woo, you know, as a lot of
Sure.
other astrologies. I'm not trying to predict anything. You know, we have choice. We have free will. I believe we have free will. We can choose. The planets aren't compelling us to do anything. We make our own
Mhm.
mind about things. It's just it's a reflection, and you know it's that hermetic adage, right? From the Emerald Tablet, the paraphrase is, you know, as above, so below. So it's
Sure.
just sort of like the cosmos reflecting our mind, you know, and we're reflecting it back. So that's just kind of my quick sort of get your sea legs on like kind of my interplay with astrology and how I sort of fit in. So what is your interest other than I said, "Hey Desiree, you want to come on my podcast?" I mean, you're a science teacher. And astrology is often, you know, mostly seen as like a woo non-scientific sort of endeavor.
Sure. Oh, on a professional level, I would say I'm curious about life and existence. So there's sort of a anthropological fascination that kind of came in this package. So I love learning new things. Um, uh, when it comes to what I do, I teach astronomy.
Mm.
And so, I'm interacting with students and pointing out celestial bodies
Mhm.
and helping people sort of understand the cycles and the predictability and the historic implications and navigation and all the things that you can address when doing short classes on astronomy. So anything that I can do to inform what I'm already teaching, to just continuously learn, I think makes me a better teacher. The better I can learn, the more I can teach. So that's one aspect of it. Also just, the ubiquitous nature of archetypes. I like things that apply to everyone, that supersede culture, language, race, persuasions, and apply to all of us. So I think that in your approach to astrology, there's some ubiquitous, universal things that apply to everyone. And so that's intriguing and inspiring and would make me say yes to doing this podcast. And also, Aaron, knowing you and your family, I just want to support your endeavors because I believe like when you find your interest and passion and purpose, your allies in your life are there to help you push forward through that and really get as curious as you can, get the biggest results as you can.
Yeah, that reminds me of the Four of Wands in the mythical tarot. I also have a
Sure.
tarot practice that it's for me personally, and, that's sort of Four of Wands energy, what you're describing, you know, it's basically your friends helping. So in this particular card, it's Jason of Jason and the Argonauts fame. And
Mhm.
his crew that he's assembled, so the Dioscuri, so Castor and Polydeuces, Heracles, Orpheus, and Theseus are there with him, and they're like, you know, to stand in to show the crew of the Argo. So that
Right.
they just built the Argo, they're on the shore, they're getting ready to like set sail to go get the Golden Fleece, and that's kind of the Four of Wands in the mythical tarot. And what you just said reminded
Yeah,
me.
and the way that applies to everyone and everything through all time is that it's just a known fact that when you have an intention and you set a course, it is only magnified if you find the right people to align yourself with.
Yeah, Joseph Campbell talked about it's sorta, uh, you know, when you follow your bliss,
Mhm.
your helping hands just kinda show up and help you along, serendipitously. It's a word I've been saying a lot today. So, so yeah.
Yeah, I think also there's the aspect of, you could be the most accomplished musician or vocalist. You could be a prodigy. However, you could never be a symphony. You could never be an orchestra because some things don't come to us independently,
Yeah, yeah. So,
which is why archetypes help us make sense of the world around us.
yeah, so it's really about story, um, and the stories that we tell ourselves. And that's why myth is so important, especially in times like we're living in, because if you don't have the stories that inform your perspective and your attitudes towards life, then something will come in and fill that for you. Somebody, some entity, something, is going to take advantage of the fact that you're unguarded in your true north, right? You don't have
Sure.
you don't have a tr this is the whole thing, like, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything, right? Something will come along and and fill that void for you. So, my understanding in myth and archetype, because really archetype is myth. I mean, they're very much the same. Like, myths are speaking about and to archetype, like Heracles is an archetype, that's the solar hero. Did you have anything you wanted to add to any of that?
Well, absolutely. My first exploration of it also comes through Joseph Campbell. What a great initiator for so many of us seeking information. And I think it's not even removable from our consciousness. So even if you've never heard of Jason and the Argonauts, even if you've never done any divination, even if you've never pursued anything astrological, myth and story are just woven into the fabric of the human experience. So whether you understand the archetypes through Greek or Roman history, or you follow and model the Kardashians, you cannot undo myth and story from your human experience.
Mhm.
And the thing I like about exploring it with you, Aaron, is that there's some type of historical relevance. You can compare and contrast the characters and the stories of what people were going through thousands of years ago, and have a direct experience. Like, I'm a human being, I go through that, and this is the way I do it. And it doesn't matter if you're obsessed with sports or modernity or hobbies, there will be story and myth woven into the experience, whether you're conscious of it or not.
Yep. So, it's best, in my opinion, to be conscious of it, right? Because essentially then you can choose more.
That's my opinion too. But I always sort of find myself questioning when I say, like, people should do this, because I'm so curious about my observation of people who go through life blindly or trusting, or, just not questioning. And I judge their experience as less informed. But then, it goes back to, like, the free will. Like, you can go through your life in a sugar intoxicated stupor of just letting the world happen to you. And that's an option in this cadre of opportunity here in our living experience on Earth.
Yeah, so the power then in myth, right, comes from if you're informed about it and you choose your myth, right? One, you're choosing it, but two, you're tapping into truth, right? It's the Sallust quote that, I'm gonna bosh it, but basically it says that are myth are things that never happened but always are, right?
Mm,
So literally, did Heracles exist? Well, that's not the point, right? But that archetype is true and always has been. And so
right.
these stories that come to us are tested by time. And we're still telling these stories because they're the best stories ever told. That's why we're still telling them. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason why we're still telling them. There's a reason why, of course, I'm biased being a student of classical Greek mythology, right? But it used to be to say you were classically educated meant that you had read the Greek and Roman authors. That's what a classical education used to mean. And what that does for you is it provides a whole intelligence that's not specialized, right? It's the whole of the human experience, and what we find there is just wisdom. So do you want wisdom? And in fact, that's what philosophy means, right? Philosophy is the lovers of Sophia, Sophia being wisdom. So what do you think about that? I just sort of
I
dumped a
think
lot there, didn't I?
no, I'm feeling it. Yeah, it makes me wonder about, all the stories and myth that we aren't even aware of yet that's been ancient to, remote tribes and untouched by Western world cultures. Because I think the thing you find is that the characters' names have changed,
Mhm,
but the plot and the takeaway
mhm.
remains the same. Like, I can say that, "Oh, though that's their version of what the gods were doing at the time, but this is how it applied to the people." And you just find time and time again that it applies, it's timeless. If you just get the message and get the takeaway, whether those characters were true. There's people, for example, that take the King James Bible and say, those are historical events. Those are real characters. They lived real human lives. And what happened was what happened at the time. It's not a myth. And I feel like to ancient Greeks, those weren't myths, but we call it Greek mythology because it's far enough away that we can't justify it on a personal level. Yet, the takeaways, the story, the moral, the message, the experience, the sentiment, the emotion, completely relatable.
Yeah, well, if, you look at, like, the pagan, polytheistic, uh, connection to, theology, or just gods versus God, right? What the Romans did, speaking to your point, and the Greeks, it was like, "Oh, Ares, whoa, that's our Mars." They saw it
Right.
as the same thing, right? They saw it as a god, Mars is a god. So now, uh, we can call that an archetype now, but what you're talking about, there's a term the Renaissance, thinkers would have used, the term Prisca Theologia. Another term for what you're talking about is the perennial philosophy. And so basically the idea is that these are the themes that are woven through human experience,
Exactly.
regardless of the culture. The names
Right.
change, the plot may change in the story, right? But, um, it's still the same story, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And in archetypal astrology, you know, it's sort of, in a lot of ways, it's about going back to, uh, a more of a polytheistic, but also just archaic, primordial, engagement with the idea of gods and meaning. Um, uh, so in a way, it's like there's nothing that's new there, except we're moderns, and our understanding of science, is, we have more understanding of, what we can see with a microscope or a telescope. Our tools have gotten more precise and technological, but that doesn't mean that we know more about reality, um, in a deeper, broader sense of meaning, and not just what is true about physical reality, right? We can, or you could argue, we know a lot more, now about physical reality than the ancient Greeks did, or the Egyptians, ancient Egyptians did. But what I would like to point out specifically, since I didn't know that you taught astronomy. That's new to me. I don't know how I didn't know that, but that's really cool to know that. And so what I want to now point out, right, is that 2,000 years ago, I mean, really up to the Copernican revolution. So essentially around the time of past that to around the Renaissance, around that, 15, 1600s, the Enlightenment period, right? Up until that point, there was no difference between an astronomer and an astrologer. They were the same thing. That those people, our ancestors would not have made a distinction between the two disciplines because there was no distinction. In order for you to have been an astrologer, right, you had to be an astronomer. And in fact, mathematics
Mm.
as a human endeavor evolved with the astronomers. That was the onus for geometry is measure of the earth, right? But in relation to what? In relation to the sun and the moon and the stars and the planets. So geometry and mathematics are we have astrology to thank for that, because back then, right, there was no difference between astronomy and astrology. Back then, you know, the planets were gods essentially, and that changed throughout time as well. But to be an astronomer meant so we make this distinction around the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution, right? And that's where you see the two disciplines disengaged from one another. And now it's because now it's just the Descartes, I think therefore I am, Newton came along and Kepler came along, and we started understanding the physics and a little bit better and realized that it's just the sun appears to be moving on the ecliptic. Really, it's the earth moving, not the sun. Like we started really fully understanding. And at that point, it's like, oh, all that meaning is just nonsense. It's just billiard balls smacking into one another, and it's all cause and effect and the Big Bang. And that's all. And like now we can describe everything from like with 100 zeros next to it, right? In time, from the point of the Big Bang. Like that's all they can't like now it's like we just can't explain the Big Bang, but everything from that point forward, from that point on, we can describe and explain, via science and physics.
But what science doesn't give us, what physics doesn't give us, is meaning.
Right. That's what astrology
So
does in this.
yeah. And I also just wonder, the people that constructed the Mayan pyramids, which such a comprehensive understanding of the celestial bodies that they could access in their hemisphere. Without the scientific equipment, those celestial events that influenced megalith buildings, you know, offered the meaning without the actual scientific precision tools. And think about that too with, the people that build Angkor Wat. Just a substantial understanding of what was happening in the heavens above them without the precise equipment, but with the associated archetypal story and myth around it, because you see the intense detail to sculptural elements, to effigies, to the architecture taking on the story as well as what was happening above.
Yeah, I know Angkor Wat. I've learned a little bit about the astronomy involved in the structure and the symbolism.
Yeah,
And yeah, it's very much um sacred geometry informed all of that. And well, what is that? Like
exactly.
I kind of am I don't really like saying sacred geometry. I do it because people kind of know what I'm talking about when I say that, because it's like, to me, geometry is sacred. So it doesn't need to
Right.
be prefaced, you know?
I would just say, here's another example of implementing the golden mean, you know.
Sure. Yep. So phi. right, is the golden mean, which is the Fibonacci sequence is something people may have learned about with respect to what that is. That particular um, piece of mathematics and geometry is really fundamental, along with pi, for pretty much everything the Egyptians did. I know, like that is incorporated, and then nature itself, right, expresses that in things that grow, essentially, right? Regeneration is dictated by this number, and oh god, what is it? 1.6189, I thought, something like that, I think. I don't know, I can't uh there's two of them. There's phi and phi, and they're related. And I can't really speak intellectually too much about it. Can you? Expound
I really
on the
can't.
golden mean much?
Well, I can tell you from a science teacher
Uh-huh.
perspective, you know, if you can distill it down to predictable patterns occurring in nature. So I used to teach a class many years ago about patterns in nature, which would be like the foundation that you would lay on a young mind who doesn't yet comprehend geometry itself, and just starting to get the mind around pattern, predictability, and shapes. But then once you start to become capable of having the mental capacity to understand geometry, then you can develop a thought like, how is geometry sacred? How does this apply to multiple stages of my life? How can I implement this as a strategy and tool to make my life and the lives of those that I love better? It starts with understanding patterns and
And
shapes.
that's what
And
astrology
that's
is about. Patterns
it all comes exactly
and
comes back to that.
timing, essentially. Patterns and timing. Those are the two biggest, I would say, in astrology. Like, what are we doing when we're looking at a planet and where it is? How do we get meaning from that, right? Well, it's derived from angles, which is geometry.
And also we get confirmation. So, for example, when we look at the smallest things, when we can develop equipment that allows us to view the smallest things,
Mhm,
we see repetitive shapes.
mhm,
Look at DNA, look at cell division. When we look at the biggest things that we can perceive, galaxies, nebulas, uh, we see again a predictable geometric pattern.
mhm.
And we can look at a shell, we can look at a nautilus shell, we can look at the way trees grow. And again, we see these predictable shapes and patterns, sort of giving us confirmation that there is something to this all, that there that's for something. It's not random, and I think chaos is one thing, but randomness, it makes our lives harder to understand and interpret. Like a cancerous tumor is so random and bulbous and non-configurative and non-cohesive. And a snowflake is a pattern and beautiful and repetitive and fractaling.
Mm.
And so we see
Ordered.
in life these. Exactly. We see those things and think that's the direction that I need to focus on because that's the universal.
Well, I would argue that, it is chaos and order. What you're like, you use the example of like a cancerous tumor, you know, being growth essentially that's not contained, right? It's just out of control. It's chaos. If it's not controlled and ordered, right? I mean, granted, this is either or, dic- a dichotomy, right? It is bipolar, like thinking, right? It's not. It's duality. It's and it's better to think in threes, right? It's better to think in a ternary to break the binary, right? Always. That's something I learned from my studies in druidry. I don't. Did you know that I was considered myself a druid for 10 years? Then I think
I
I've
mean, it didn't know that, but it wouldn't surprise me
yeah.
at all.
Yeah, I was, still technically, I guess, would still be a card-carrying member of the Ancient Order of Druids in America, but I've always
Mhm.
been solitary, and I don't necessarily anymore these days, I would claim astrologer, before druid, but these are all just labels, anyway.
Sure.
But, to the golden mean, you probably know, but I just wanna mention it for the sake of the listeners, and maybe you don't know, but do you know that's expressed geometrically, that's expressed in the pentagram or the pentacle is where we see phi everywhere, the golden mean. It's in the arms of the pentacle, of the star, the five-pointed star. Did you know that?
It doesn't surprise me at all considering just how much you see it in nature, in the cross section of a tree, in the mouth parts of a starfish, in the skeletal body of an urchin. You just it's just there,
Yeah.
and symbols and iconography and sigils and symbols through time uh are repetitive. I know that in cultures throughout time, a shape similar to the swastika
Mhm.
was represented in their art.
Vedic. Yeah, that was a Vedic
Um,
symbol.
exactly. And there's a pentagram, basically a five-pointed star in a
Mhm.
circle has been used throughout time to mean different things. But, more recently, like modern iconography, it's associated with like witchcraft or even the Church of Satan.
Well,
But then if you look at d- um,
that's
divination tools, when you call it pentacles and it's on a card, and then depending how far you go into your divination pursuits, you recognize it in modern playing cards where way more people have experience with that. And then you see it reflected and patterned again. So it doesn't surprise me that like the iconography through the ages really comes back to what we're talking about is this baseline patterning and geometry that helps us interpret our existence as human beings on this planet and as beyond as we can perceive.
yeah, so the pentacle, the negative association in modern times with that would be the pentacle upside down, right? So the point of the star pointing downwards, right? That most people though don't know that. They just think the pentacle, oh, it's the devil's sign or whatever. Like but it's not. It's sacred geometry, and it's five. It's the number five in numerology and sacred geometry is the golden mean is what it's about, and it's you know technically it's the third number because three was the first number that the ancients would have considered. One and two weren't numbers to them. Three was the first number, so five would have been the
Mhm.
third number. But, I digress, and I can continue digressing on this topic. Well, actually, I'll just say one more thing to kinda pull it back to, like, specifically to an example in astrology with 5 and the pentacle. So, Venus makes what's called a pentangle. So, there's the planet Venus defines a pentacle in her orbits, actually. So that's pretty interesting and maybe worth looking into. It gets kind of technical and I can't explain it technically, but I just know that association is there with Venus. And so if you trace that further, because the symbol of Venus and what Venus means, especially if you start looking at it through like more of a Christian westernized theme or lens rather, she's like the temptress responsible, right, for materiality in general, and right, and how does she create materiality, right? It's through sexuality, right? It's the impulse to generate, to procreate. She does it, via temptation, carnal temptations. So you kind of can see the echo there of like the negative association. This is just one angle looking at the pentacle and why it's now could be considered, sort of an evil symbol or whatever. It's just misinformed. It's a lot of that, right? So, yeah, interesting to me that you teach astronomy, and and you're very interested in story and myth, right? And it's like, so what is astrology in relation to all that? It's just the meaning that is present in all of that. It's another reflection of that meaning. It's another language that we can use as symbol to express and communicate these archetypal ideas.